All right, people, welcome to the DCliff Training podcast, numero uno. I wanted to kind of do this like introductory style, just a solo podcast, in the hopes that when I continue this and start having guests, maybe years down the road, people can look back and be like, all right, podcast number one is mostly why this has started. Obviously, I'm going to be rambling for the next 20 to 25 minutes, but I've also learned a lot in the past 2 years from starting the business and actually starting to do some research on not just my anecdotal experience. So hopefully there's some good stuff in here too. Now, I want this podcast to be more of a conversation because I think, when it comes to scripting content and just doing a terrible job in general of recording videos and trying to edit it and having to fix the background and the lighting and do all this other stuff, I think a lot of my own voice has been lost. And one thing I know from, writing in the past is when it's in my voice and when it's more of a conversational style, it's more easily digestible, and I think that's what gets people to understand what I'm trying to convey, and that's the point of language anyways. So let's get into it. I guess I've come up with some questions, basically what would I expect people to ask if I was actually, a famous trainer, which one day. So number one, why are you doing this in general? I cut my career short, and a lot of my friends honestly have been asking me like, bro, what are you doing? You know what I'm saying? I turned down 300 grand overseas in not the peak of my career. I had some good years followed by some terrible years, but I'm still able to make a lot of money overseas. My answer to that is obviously a lot. And people ask me in passing, all these like deep questions that require a lot of thought and a lot of discourse. And I don't really have the ability to answer that without 5 minutes of your time. I would say the simplest way I could put it was I felt stagnated by where I was as a professional. And I felt wronged by a lot of the training industry. What that means is, I supposedly had access to the best resources in the world. And for some reason, my body kept collapsing as soon as I started to reach a certain level athletically and on the court performance-wise. And what that means is I had great spurts and I was always limited by my body. And so as a player, that was frustrating enough to be like, I have to find another career because I did not want to be a 38-year-old basketball player that was still making 100 to 200 grand a year. And then I had to restart my life after I left the court. And I think a lot of people are bound to go right into coaching. And I don't knock that at all. I love coaching, but I spent the last 2 years figuring out that I loved coaching. I did not want to be forced into any profession. And at that point in my basketball career, I felt like I was forced to keep playing just because of the money. And honestly, like a lot of things about European basketball forced me to lose my love for the game. And half of that's on me. I don't blame anything on anybody for that. That's just what happened. That's part of my process. Why did I start training? I was just trying to figure out how to make money online in the last few years of my career because I was so frustrated with what was happening in my seasons, being away from home, all that classic European story stuff. That's not the point of this podcast. The point is I started doing some marketing for trainers, and then I started adding in some of my own flavor to be like, oh, I actually know this because I speak the language of athletes. Like I was an athlete for a long time. And so over the past 2 years, I started doing regular personal training stuff, but then the stuff that I was super passionate about was obviously the rehab and recovery aspect. Just because of my injury history. Again, the amount of times that I was capped by an injury, the amount of times that I had a call from my agent Denver's gonna go call you up for a 10-day. That happened in the G League, or the Euro League is calling, and I get injured, within the next 2 weeks. And then a downward spiral mentally and physically of my performance and just how I felt about my life as a basketball player, just all going down the drain. I felt like I understood the rehab process just from my own experience very deeply and emotionally. And that's what helped me connect with other people that are injured. And so I started leaning into that. And obviously I've gotten good testimonials. I am still catching up and I will never stop learning about this process. But just the fact that I can speak the language really helps me as a trainer at this point. So I started doing the rehab stuff. I love the idea of running my own business because it has forced me to grow in a multitude of ways. I was irresponsible, and just used to taking orders, right? Like as a professional basketball player, hey, and you see in the group chat, hey, tomorrow the bus leaves at 9. All right, word. I just have to show up to the gym at 9 a.m. and I'll be there early. And I don't have to worry about where I'm going, how I'm getting there. Everything is taken care of. So there were times when I was traveling Europe where my teammates are like, hey, Cliff, where are we going? What country are we going to land in today? And I would have no idea. I never cared. And that was like a funny little shtick of mine, but also an underlying problem is like, I'm not even responsible enough to be a grown adult at this point. And that obviously carries into other aspects of my life. That's why I wanted to start my own business. Well, that's not why I wanted to start, but that is an added bonus that I've seen in the past 2 years. I've had to just grow up because the only thing in my life that I was ever good at was basketball. And I kind of was working under the notion of like, if I take care of the things I need to take care of on the court, everything else will kind of take care of itself. I don't need to really do anything. And I think that was eating away at me inside. So that's kind of why I left the game. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing right now. And I guess that's the short version. If we had a conversation about it, I'm sure I could add in or elaborate on some things. And honestly, if you guys are watching this episode and if you have more questions about anything, just drop them in the comments and I can make another episode. So another question that I fabricated for myself is how can someone benefit from listening to this podcast? I would say I have a different approach. I have a very unique angle on the training and the rehab process, just because again, I speak the language. Like when I talk about pain or exercises or functional movement or how to train for a basketball season, it is because I had 10 years of playing high level basketball that was like dealing with pain, or like I had good seasons that I was able to attribute to like, wow, I had a really good summer. This is what I did in the summer, and this is why I'm experiencing this success. For example, my first year out was in the G League in the Santa Cruz Warriors. And that was one of the best, easiest flowing seasons for me, besides the injury at the end, obviously classic. But I got to see, all right, what did I do that summer? And then over the course of my career, it was like, all right, I'm having a bad season. I was bullshitting last summer. You see what I'm saying? So I got to understand that like the product you have right now is a product of the days, weeks, months, and years past. And that is all, it all feeds into your equation of what you are right now. And I got to experience that anecdotally. And then obviously the point of all of this is the injury stuff. Is like, I understand what it's like to wake up on a game day and the first steps out of bed is painful. And then you're like, holy shit, like I'm fucked. I don't know what to do. All I know is like how to put in the next 4 hours to make sure that I can get this pain from a fucking 8 down to a 6. And if it's at a 6, I can just take a pain pill before the game and just like go straight into warrior mode. And through my research, I'm now understanding like what is actually happening mentally and physically when you go into a game with that extra stress. Obviously, that's not the way you want to play. You want to have a certain tension about you, but you also want to be free flowing because basketball is a game of decision making. If you're held down, if you're tied down by like, when I look back at my film and when I look back in just my own memories of like playing, there was so much resistance and I couldn't even read and react because every part of my being was trying to fight through knee pain. And I understood every single movement. I know because I've stored it subconsciously. I know this is gonna hurt. Shit. Like every start and every stop is going to hurt. So how do I deal with that? And that's most of the research is like understanding that mental process and how it really affects athletes. And then obviously trying to escape pain with corrective exercises, with the right mental approach, and with all the other things that I kind of have made my mission to teach the world about. So that's one thing that people will benefit is just me telling my story about pain. I need to tell my story better because still a lot of people don't understand the story. Maybe that'll be the next part. I have a My Journey 5-minute video on YouTube. I'm not sure if people want to watch that, but it talks kind of like the logistics of what happened through my 5 years at BC and how the injury happened and then what I had to do to overcome that. Again, yeah, I'll never stop learning So I'm in the process of researching and getting certifications and doing all that stuff. But I think the main thing for me is, again, I speak the language. So number one, I guess next question. What are your two most important takes? I didn't even prepare for this, but I would say context is key. So in the training world, and I've fell victim to this, is like for the best thing for me to do for this business, for my training business, is to go out there and act like I'm better than everybody else. And part of that is talking down on every other modality except the one that I call my own. And I'm learning from all these other different things, and I'm trying to create a product that is my own. And then I go on social media and I talk about how this is the pinnacle of training and everything else is shit for you. Excuse me. I think where I'm at now, context rules above all. Where it's like, I started thinking, all right, like this is the best way to get strength gains. This is the best way to be pain-free. All of those things are not wrapped into one. Like in training, you have to really get a good idea of where you are right now and where you want to be. And that line that connects A to B is your context. And if you're doing anything outside of that context, then that's not the training program for you. So basically what I have set up for myself now is a shop of, number one, if you're in pain, you have to get pain-free. So what are the specific things that we can do to get your body functioning so that it is pain-free? And then after that, if you're a basketball player, if you want to work on endurance, there is a protocol for that. If you want to work on strength, there is a protocol for that. If you want to work on your vert, there's a protocol for that. And then we get into the variables of how do we progress one thing into the other to make sure that you're the best basketball player. Now, when you get into the scientific research of what makes the best basketball player, it's not like there's one study of like, you do endurance training and then you potentiate that into max strength training and then you potentiate that into this plyometric training. There is no such thing as that research just because there's too many uncontrollable variables. So every trainer is just kind of trying to combine all of this research and create either personalized or cookie cutter plans for athletes around the world to say like, in your context, this is what I believe to be the best route for you. That's number one. Context is like, if you're not, and that's why it's super important not to just bash an exercise in general or a modality in general, just because it's like, all right, like if I can't bash normal personal trainers for being experts in fat loss, if they deliver the results, then that's great. And they're enhancing people's lives, they're making people's lives better, and they're earning a living. I think that's awesome. So take two, I gotta think about this one. Take two is, I guess, a subtext of take one, where like context really super fucking matters, especially if you want to be specific. Everything in the weight room has to be specific. Take number two is if you are a basketball player, you're doing things in the weight room to make sure that you are better on the court. And that gets lost in translation a lot, where if my job as a strength and conditioning coach, the best way for me to prove my worth is to say, hey, athlete number A got better numbers in the weight room, and that means I did my job. But sometimes those numbers in the weight room do not translate to the court. And again, I'm speaking anecdotally. A week before I had a career-ending injury, I broke the squat record at BC for basketball players. So, and it didn't even click. It's only looking back and after like the couple years I've had doing actual research, I'm able to like really understand that, because it didn't even click after that. I was like, oh, well, then that means I just have to make this body part stronger, or this, or hit this, or hit this. And now looking back, I'm like, wow, I dedicated so much time in the weight room and I prioritized that over the basketball stuff. Where in reality is I had the highest squat on the team and I was still one of the lowest verticals, you know what I'm saying? And especially as you get to the higher levels where the average vert in the NBA might be 35 inches, I'm sitting over here at 28 and bragging about my squat. You know what I'm saying? So again, context is key. If you need to produce more force, you want to get a better squat number, but that is not more important than what you can do on the court. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that in the NBA now, where people are studying these fat and slow players that are absolutely cooking people. So that's what I have to say about that. The next question is, why do we experience pain? And I think I've formulated a pretty good process to understand and to try to deliver to people, especially in the onboarding process. Is you have to understand this to really understand how you got into pain and then how do you get out of pain. For me, this framework is step one is dysfunction. That leads to load exceeding the tissue capacity in a local area. And this excessive load leads to either acute or chronic pain. So let me go through number one. Dysfunction is anything that is not in line with how we were naturally made, right? So if I was naturally made to have a certain amount of posture, and that does not just mean stiff and braced in the shoulders back position like everybody talks about. If I was made in a certain alignment, very much like a building, if one joint or structure is off, then that building is going to have a lot more load on this one point. So in the beams, in the house that you are in right now, if one joint structure was off just by a small angle, then the load would be there and everywhere else. And the load would exceed that local capacity. For example, if my dysfunction is causing excess load in my knee, then the load and the force that is going into the knee would exceed the abilities that my knee tissues have. And then that leads to problem number three, which is acute or chronic pain. Obviously, if it happens acutely, if the load is way far above and beyond the tissue capacity, you're gonna get a tear in the ligament, in the tendon, in the muscle, whatever, or a broken bone. Those are acute injuries that happen in a split second. Chronically, I think is more confusing for people because the load is either at the threshold or just a little bit above the knee. And that's what happened to me, which is my dysfunction is causing problems in my knee, but it's just chipping away a little bit at a time, and maybe over five or 6 years. You see, like the pain is kind of like an iceberg. When you see pain, there's a whole heap of underlying issues that you may have not noticed until you get that pain signal. So framework one, dysfunction is posture, breath, muscle imbalances, how you use your body in general. Then step number two, load or the force coming into your body or the force that you have to emit while you're running, jumping, landing, cutting, it would exceed a local tissue capacity. So now dysfunction is the template for everybody. How that manifests in your body, it could be into your shoulder, it could be lower back, hips, knees, or foot. Anywhere along that kinetic chain, you see in basketball, you see a lot of lower back, hips, knees, and feet. And that is just because of continuous movement that is very similar. If we do that for a long period of time, you get chronic pain. And then you go to see the doctor and they'll just put your knee under a microscope and they'll see, all right, your cartilage is wearing down, which means you have arthritis, which means you have osteoporosis or any other of these like degenerative diseases. And that disempowers you for finding a solution. Whereas the way I look at it is like, all right, you have all of these problems because your body has not been able to regenerate because of the dysfunction, because of your posture, because of the muscle imbalances, etc. So now how do we fix that system to allow the knee to actually regenerate over time? Because everything in our body will degenerate. We know this. That's how we experience pain. And obviously, again, I could elaborate more on that if I had another person to talk to, but this is just me rambling. And so now I guess this is time to wrap this up. I got another question. What is the best way to start? The way I started and the way that like opened up my mind to all of these possibilities, right, was in 2012, I had been injured for 2 years straight. And so my knees hurt every time I got up from a chair, every time I got into bed, anytime I had to bend my knee at all, going upstairs, even going for a walk. So like I was basically totally sedentary for that, again, trying to gear up for tonight's practice. Like I was in such a bad place because every single time I moved, it hurt my knees. It felt like a nail was driving into my kneecap anytime I put any type of tension on it. The way I started was on the lacrosse ball. And this thing, so before then, doctors were like, your knee is degenerating. You have the knees of an 80-year-old person. You should avoid stairs. And if you cannot fight through this pain on the court, you should just give it up because there is no going back from here. You're screwed. You're chopped. It's quiet. Whatever. I was in the state of mind that I would never get better and I would never feel better for about 2 years straight. Like no small wins on any type of daily basis, like 0 wins, just like plane crash, mental and physical. The lacrosse ball showed me if I can put this somewhere in my hips or my glute max or around the knee or my calves or my quads or my hamstrings and do a trigger point release. Now there's a specific way to do this, which I can get into, but if I can do a trigger point release on parts of my body, it makes my legs feel 10 years younger, which is crazy to me. Like, it's honestly crazy that not everybody talks about this, because I lived with this same problem, that I saw the best doctors in the world. I had an ACC medical staff with a lot of doctors and a lot of athletic trainers and strength coaches that were all trying to figure out this problem. And I do not blame them. But it's crazy to me in this industry that not everybody knows that if you do a trigger point release in the TFL and the glute med and the glute max, it can actually release your whole entire leg. And you will almost feel like a blood rush going down your leg, like you have a new amount of circulation that you haven't tapped into for the past 5 years. So you will actually feel 10 years younger after hitting certain spots. And it's up to you to use your intuition on which spots are literally holding you back, which are bottlenecking you in your athletic journey. And that's why you see somebody like me. It's like I would look at your posture and say, all right, here's the 3 points that we're going to focus on this week, and then we can change it up depending on how you feel after each one. So for me, the lacrosse ball literally showed me that it's possible to feel better. And I was like, that was crazy. And there's a lot of other signs about how a myofascial release will help you release tension in your mind as well, because pain is obviously super psychosomatic, especially the chronic conditions that some of us are dealing with. It's great. The lacrosse ball stuff is great before you go to bed because it relaxes you, it decompresses you from your day. Again, it's just about relaxing. And learning how to relax is a skill that not a lot of athletes understand. Just because we are taught to be so type A, we are taught that if there's an obstacle in front of us, we have to go through it. And that's like, that comes from years of working out hard as shit. And that comes from the athletic mentality of like, this is a competition. Like, if I'm going against you, one of us is coming out alive and it has to be me. So that mentality plus pain on a daily basis is not a good combination. So again, the lacrosse ball work, you can find an SMR playlist. I have 2 of them in my YouTube channel. Go check it out if you want. I explain in detail why it's important to hit basically each muscle group. And it's awesome because you learn how to give yourself the best massage in the world. Whereas like if you go to a massage, they're not exactly doing it the right way just because there is obviously a disconnect, which is natural. It's another person. They cannot feel what you feel. So when you get on the lacrosse ball, you can feel those points that you're like, oh, I have to go in, like, I have to go deep into this point. Pause. The next thing I would do is some postural stuff. And I think a lot of us, because we are slouched over, just because of modern habits, I think our pelvis is not able to access anterior pelvic tilt and posterior pelvic tilt. I think we need to access both of them. And in this space, there's a lot of bashing the anterior pelvic tilt, but when you look at high-level athletes, they're all accessing an anterior pelvic tilt rather aggressively. So if our body is able to access that anterior pelvic tilt while firing the glutes and while using our body correctly, that the posture chores that I've been doing from personal experience and obviously prescribing them to my clients, they work the best. Because again, why do we experience pain? Dysfunction is first. And so the posture chores and the lacrosse ball is trying to address the root cause of all of these other issues, all the other symptoms. So if you address the muscle imbalances with the lacrosse ball, and then some of the postural dysfunction with these posture chores and trying to align the hips and then connecting it to your breath, because again, your breath, I say again a lot, even though I haven't mentioned this before, but your breath is connected to the autonomic nervous system. So in order to make these changes, you kind of have to calm your brain down. You know what I'm saying? Because if your brain is still in fight or flight, you're not going to be able to make these adaptations. And why are we working out in the first place? It's all to make positive adaptations. So if your brain is fighting adaptation, doesn't matter how many exercises you do, it's not going to make a change. The way to access The decompressed state, the non-stress state, the parasympathetic nervous response, is by your breath. And I have a posture playlist. I would check out the posture playlist number 1 and 2 on my YouTube channel. Again, I'm not plugging it. I'm just saying this is how I would start. And again, the only reason why I started this in the first place is because I would have really, really loved to have a system like this in 2012 and throughout the rest of my career when I was fighting pain, basically on a daily basis. If I had just this structure, I would have been able to be healthy, and I would have been able to play freely. And I don't know when the last time that was. And if you want, so go click around, honestly, and just see what you like and see what you don't. If you have questions, you can hit me up. And if you want the structured plan, I have a free recovery and mobility guide, and it's in the link in my bio. So do that. I think that is honestly a great first step. And that's really it, folks. I have no idea how to end this, so I'm just gonna say peace and good luck. Let me know if you want me to talk about anything else. I'm planning on having other basketball players to talk about their injury journey and just to talk about basketball in general, athletics in general. Again, this is the industry that I love and that I'm passionate about, so I look forward to continuing this process. Thank you guys. Peace.